Okay, today we're going to look at Freemasonry. As I say, it's not an easy subject to look at. I've given you very thorough notes because to get through them, this massive information is very difficult. It is a very complex issue, though it's also very simple, as most idolatrous things are, because they're so layered. They really, all the pagan stuff, it's like you can never get the thread right because they mix it up and then they change it. And so what's important for us today is to really understand what Freemasonry is. And I need to state that most people that get involved in Freemasonry do not know what Freemasonry is rooted to. Most of them are there because of a lack of knowledge, and most of them will never be exposed to the fullness of the occultism in it. Okay, so the fact that we look at the system, that we look at what it is, by no means say that people that get involved are people that want to serve the devil in such a way. Some of them think it's Christian. We'll show you a lot of symbolism that they use that's supposedly Christian, but if you look at it, you see it's not. Okay, so firstly, we need to say Freemasonry is the world's biggest and most influential secret society. Anything that's secret and happens in darkness is not good. It's not scriptural. It's a fraternal organization that arose from obscure origins in the late 16th and 17th century. And Freemasonry now exists in various forms all over the world with a membership estimated of about 6 million. It's quite a lot of people that really connects themselves to what we will call paganism. Now, the process I'm going to follow to try and talk about Freemasonry is we're going to start looking at what the spiritual roots of Freemasonry are. Then we're going to move into the historical roots, and then we're going to move into modern Freemasonry, just see how it's structured, how it functions, some of their degrees, and what's basically found there. Then I'll move into the process of just talking about some symbols that we need to be able to recognize as Masonic symbols that's used quite a lot. Then we'll just quickly look at what influence Freemasonry brings within a society, and we'll look at some examples where Freemasonry then has an influence worldwide in city design, buildings, and so forth, and how Freemasonry tries to bring forth an influence through that. Okay? There's a lot of information, so forgive me if I'm not always sure where I have to go. We'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. Freemasonry takes its symbols and power from all the most powerful and ancient pagan religions and what we call mystery religions. Freemasonry has been vaunted by its authorities to be a form of the ancient mysteries. Now again, a lot of the quotes that we'll look at, people like Mackey, people like Pike, Albert Pike, Freemason writers, what happens in Freemasonry, it is so layered in its symbolism that they give a different meaning to each symbol on every level. And it's only those that really go up high that get the true meaning of a symbol. And that's what makes it so difficult for people to discern what it's about. But they themselves acknowledge that Freemasonry pulls most of its symbolism and rituals from the ancient mysteries. So what would be a definition for the mystery religions? Ancient religions that admitted candidates by secret rites and rituals, the meaning of which was known only to the initiated worshipper. Okay, and so for a lot of us, we might see symbols and never know that they are symbols of Masonic background or even of pagan background, and most of us never know what it means because we're not part of the initiated few. Okay? The basic features of the pagan mystery religions are, firstly, they were polytheistic, believing in many gods, and or pantheistic, where God is the universe. Meaning God is in everything that was created, and it's about discovering that. So that's the first point of mystery religions, and the reason I'm going through this is because you'll see this in Freemasonry, and we have to understand that it is part of the pagan mystery religion systems. Secondly, they have a cyclical view of history. They believe that there are eternal and repeatable cycles of life, and they view the seasons as a pageant of the gods. Okay? The veneration of worship, thirdly, of the regenerative process of nature, basically sex, as the sacred mystery. Now, we've seen that this whole week. And basically, you've got a very accurate understanding if you know every pagan thing just goes right back into sex rituals. And to them, that's the highest form of religious secrets. Okay? Not very nice. The worship of sexuality is tied up intrinsically with the pageant of the seasons and the concern for the fertility of land, and the mysteries believe that the god resided right in the processes of fertility. They believe that the elements of plant, animal, and human reproduction were godlike. The great mystery of the mystery religions was the worship of sex. And part of the mystery was involved in the mechanics of human reproduction. Now, there's a doctrine in witchcraft, and a lot of my information I got from a book written by William Schnoebelen. He was a witch himself and a Freemason in the days that he was a witch. He says most of the people that was in the witches' coven with him were Freemasons, because that just empowered and strengthened their witchcraft aspects even more. Now, in witchcraft, they have a doctrine called the Hermetic Maxim, where it says, as above, so below, but after a different manner. And this idea is the basis of much magic and astrology. This means that human reproduction is a reflection of the larger universe. Okay? The people who put together the mysteries noted the difference between the male and female sexuality, as if that's a revelation. Using the Hermetic Maxim, they deduced an eternal goddess, listen clearly, an eternal goddess and a finite God. So who do you think is the strongest? Okay, eternal goddess and a finite God who died and needed to be resurrected on a yearly basis, and this was tied up with the seasons. So if we think about the Queen of Heaven teaching, that's where you've got the Queen of Heaven, and then the sun god that dies and needs to be resurrected. They made the sun the symbol of the god, and they made the moon the symbol of the goddess, or the eternal mother goddess. Okay, in their thinking, every year, for instance on the 25th of December, in most of the ritual or most of the pagan religions, this sun god had to be resurrected so that he can live again for the next season. Now, Pike, one of the big Masonic writers, wrote, in the mysteries was also taught the division of the universe, the universal cause, into an active and a passive cause, of which two, Osiris and Isis, the heavens and the earth, were symbols. The active and passive principles of the universe were commonly symbolized by the generative parts of a man and a woman, emblems of generation and production, and which appeared in the mysteries. Okay, so basically the male symbol would be to represent the active element, which represents the God, the sun. The female element would be the passive element, symbolized by the female genital organs, and that would many times be symbolized by the moon. Okay, so you can see a lot of stuff we spoke about this week just repeats itself. What's just interesting for me looking at Freemasonry is they're really pulling whatever they can get hold of to empower them. It's one thing if you've got a religion, but it's another thing if you take something from all the religions in order for you to have the best of everything, obviously the most powerful mix. And so we find that the main sources of the Freemason rites, symbols, and mysteries are really connected into the Babylonian mystery religions, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans. Very strong Jewish legend, which we will look at, that they then use the Bible as a reason why they have it, and then a myriad of smaller defiled sources that we'll look at, so that those things we'll quickly go through. Firstly, Babylon, the Babylonian roots. Nimrod, we heard a lot about him this week. According to the Freemasons, he was stated to be one of the founders of Freemasonry, which is true in a sense, because the pagan religion that Freemasonry represents comes from Babylon. Okay? The religion which sprang up around Nimrod and his queen Semiramis became a prototype for virtually all cults. The rites of the slain and risen god, or the rite of the divine king, from one of the core rituals of witchcraft and all fertility cults. Now there's different versions versions to all the different mythologies. Now, when you look at the mythology about Nimrod, one of the versions that you get there is that Nimrod was slain by his grandfather Ham and cut into pieces. Okay, and Nimrod and Semiramis became the first of the long line of mother goddess and father god pairs. Other versions say he died, and so Semiramis became pregnant, and she said she was pregnant by Nimrod because he was really a god, and so the child that she was expecting was the rebirth of this god, the sun god, and so she bore a child which a lot of myths would say he had the name of Tammuz, little Nimrod. Okay, here are some symbols that we find. This is a very old way that they were symbolized. You've got the sun symbolizing Nimrod, you've got the moon symbolizing Semiramis, and you've got Tammuz symbolized by a triangle. He was birthed from the two of them. Very interesting if we look at the we'll get there. Okay, you can see then Ezekiel 8 verse 14, behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Okay, this is where Tammuz comes from. It's a Babylonian background. These are some pictures you have of Nimrod. Okay, he's also many times depicted as the horned god, and then Semiramis, the mother and child that we've seen already. Nimrod, the horned god, you can see the horns on the left-hand side, fighting with a lion. Semiramis, that was the symbol of Semiramis. One of her symbols were the doves. You'll see that the wings of Semiramis and the wings of Isis in Egyptology, where Isis was just was compared to different flying animal or bird. Okay, there is also two. Nimrod is the horned god. Semiramis, you see she's got the crescent moon on her head, and this is supposed to be Tammuz. Note the pentacle at the top, or the pentagram. Okay, another symbol of Babylon that the Freemasons like is the whole symbol of the Tower of Babel. As regards to Masonry, Babel, of course, represented, they say, a Masonic enterprise. And early expositors reaped full benefit from the facts. They remembered that the people who were of one language and one speech journeyed from the east to the west like those who have tried to prove as master masons. And then it talks about the fact that when they lost that one language, a new language was born, which is basically symbology. To be able to communicate through symbols. And you'll see that Freemasonry uses symbols to communicate its message. As regards to Masonry, Babel, of course, represented the Masonic enterprise. Okay, one language and one speech journeyed from the east to the west, that I already said. When they reached an abiding place in the land of Shinar, it is affirmed they dwelt therein as Noachide, being the first characteristic name of Masons. It was here that they built their high tower of confusion. Okay, I can't explain everything that I'm going to mention. There's just too many symbols and terms to explain everything. Okay, the Babylonian roots, out of evil comes good, however, and the confusion of tongues gave rise to the ancient practice of Masons conversing without the use of speech. John Jarker said it is well known that the Tower of Babel was one of the most ancient traditions of Masonry. Okay, so we see Babel plays a very big role in providing some symbols, providing different things to the system of Freemasonry. Then we go to the Egyptian roots of Freemasonry. The Freemasons love their Egyptian symbols. Many Freemason lodges are built in the style of an Egyptian temple with a lot of different symbols from Egypt. Again, it's just the same mystery concept in a different culture. Okay? Egyptian equivalent to the Babylonian mystery. This time you've got Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And in the story, there's Set, which is really then, in modern terms, you would call the Satan figure, where he killed Osiris, chopped him into pieces, and threw his body parts all over Egypt. And little Isis, who was married to Osiris, wept because her husband was dead, and she went looking for all his body parts to bring them together again, so that through her magic she could bring him to life again. We'll talk about that story later on as we look at some of the symbols. Okay, Set kills Osiris, has him into pieces, scatters it to the four winds. Isis finds all the pieces except the phallus and cannot restore him to life. Horus is then born and is said to be the reproduction of Osiris, or the sun god that's reborn, and he then deals with Seth. Okay, there we've got drawings of Osiris and of Isis. You see Isis, the winged goddess. You see again the sun disk within her headpiece, which Khada explained very well to us. And there you see Osiris also with a phallic thing on top of his head. Okay, there you have the mother and child, Egyptian Isis and Horus. Okay, and there's a symbol of Horus with the sun disk on his head, again because he was a representation of the sun god being rebirthed. Another picture of Isis. Okay, then we also see that they've got roots into the Grecian symbology. According to Masonic scholars, the earlier emergence of a type of secret society of builders similar to the Masons would have been the Dionysian artificers. Now, Dionysius was the horned Greek god of wine and madness, and he was also slain and risen. Again, just the same pattern, the god that died and had to be risen again. The Dionysian rites had a lot in common with witches' Sabbath and with Masonry. It includes enactment of the slaying and resurrection, oaths, and threats of death. Also worthy of mention is the Pythagorean school. I don't know whether I say it right. Pythagoras was a philosopher, a mathematician, and an occultist. He was a product of pagan Greek culture, and he was the founder of a brotherhood that believed in reincarnation. Okay? Nobody has ever told me that about Pythagoras. I just thought he was a clever mathematician, but he was involved in very strange spiritual things. Then they also pull from the Roman mythology, especially in architecture. When you go to Europe, you'll see a lot of Roman gods and goddesses. Okay, figures of Roman mythology, god and goddesses are often used within Masonic architecture. This is, for instance, the entrance of the US Capitol, and you've got the pagan god Mars there, the god of war. So interesting to see that, America likes to go to war. And that's where they make the decisions to go to war. Okay, some other gods that you'll often see, for instance, is Minerva. You can go and see her on top of in Pretoria, Disney. It's not the Palace of Justice. What's the opposite one? Elizabeth, help me. Raadsaal. On top of the Raadsaal, you get Minerva. Hermes, Mercury, you can go and find him on top of a dome at the Union Buildings. Atlas, you can find on top of the Union Building towers. Masonic symbols. Okay. Then they also pull a lot from Jewish legends, and their favorite is the construction of the Temple of Solomon. Now listen, the devil always comes as an angel of the light. Okay? He doesn't come as an angel from hell. He comes as an angel of light. And so within Masonry, they've got so-called biblical things. But if you study it, you will see it's not the biblical thing that they say it is. It's really the pagan thing that they've just given the right picture and the right name so that Christians think it's all right. But we see in the construction of the Temple of Solomon, it provides the backdrop for a large percentage of the rituals in the Freemasonic Lodge. Now let's quickly go to Ezekiel 8. I know we have referred to it previously, but I want us just to read it in detail because this is really what you find in Freemasonry is the restoration of this paganism just in a different type of system. God shows Ezekiel the prophet the idolatry that Israel is involved in. He says, then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in his secret chamber of pictures. For they say, the Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. He also said to me, yet again you shall see great abominations which they are committing. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the Lord's house, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then said the Spirit to me, have you seen this, O Son of man? Yet again you shall see greater abominations. than they are committing. And he brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the bronze altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple. 25 men? Men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces towards the east. And they were bowing themselves towards the east and worshipping the sun. Then the Spirit said to me, have you seen this, O Son of Man? Is it too slight a thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here, that they must fill the land with violence and turn back afresh to provoke me to anger? And behold, they put the branch to their nose, actually before their mouths, in superstitious worship. Therefore I will deal in wrath. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. Now, when we look at the whole story in Freemasonry about the restoration of or the building of the Temple of Solomon, we see some things that they say. I'm not sure what I have here. The Masonic ritual boldly proclaims that as the sun rises in the east to open and govern the day, so rises the worshipful master in the east to open and govern the lodge, to set the craft to work and give them proper instructions. We see the sun symbolism there. Here is a direct identification of the master of the lodge with the sun god Baal. How can Masonry be an enactment of the rites of Solomon's temple when the whole thing is oriented in the wrong way? Because Solomon's temple is built entrance at the east, movement to the west to get into the holy place. God purposefully put the tabernacle and the temple opposite to what the pagans do. Because the pagans need to face east to worship the sun. And in what the Masons say, and I can't go through all the detail, but in their lodge, they do things the other way around. They look to the east. And we'll look at some of the symbology of the Temple of Solomon, which is also clearly not the biblical Temple of Solomon. Okay, so this is all things that they use from the Jewish background, and part of it is because of a Babylonian influence. Okay, the Lord deliberately had the temple rites facing west, away from the rising sun, which was the chief symbol of the pagan gods. The Masonic ritual boldly proclaims the eastern facet, and that the light comes from the east. Now, Masons place an incredible importance also on the characteristics which make up the ritual of the building of the Temple of Solomon. And you've got three people there, like King Solomon, that is called the Master Mason, Hiram, the king of Tyre, and Hiram Abif, the widow's son. And the whole ritual of the third degree in Masonry is built around the myth and the false account of these so-called Masons. Okay, do not be fooled by that. Interesting, Hiram Abif, that word is many times it's an acronym for a brother in Freemasonry fellowship. Okay, and he was not a nice guy if you're going to look at it. If you look at Jewish legends, for instance, one of the things you will see, I don't know if you've ever been in a cemetery, you'll see a lot of pillars that's broken. Have you ever seen that? Okay, this is the picture that they say what happened when Hiram Abif died is supposedly, I think it is his wife or somebody that cried over him because he died, and the pillar symbolized him, that this individual that died. But if you look at the symbols in this picture, they are all Egyptian in nature. Okay. Because what you have is Isis crying over Osiris. One of the legends of Osiris is in trying to kill Osiris, Set made a wooden casket, and he tricked Osiris to get into it, and then he closed him into the casket, and then it's a very funny story. But at the end of the day, this casket was grown into a tree, and this tree was chopped down to make a pillar for someone else's temple, and so this pillar became the symbol of Osiris. And she then went to search for Osiris and found this pillar and broke it open so that she could release Osiris from it. Okay, so that's really Isis crying about Osiris that was dead. And then behind her is what they call, it could be Horus or Set. You see, it's the symbol for time, which is, I can't go into the details of that, but what we need to know is that this is just again the reenactment of the Egyptian mystery religion. Other sources for Freemason rituals and symbols would be witchcraft. William Schnoebelen says the lodge is part of a huge network of worldwide witchcraft organizations. Freemasonry is the world's largest coven of witches. A lot of them just don't know they are. That's the difference, okay? The Masonic temple is a temple of witchcraft, and it's important for us to, when we look at the symbols, to acknowledge that. We see occult and Satanism also have influence into Freemasonry. Masonry is a form of the old religion or devil worship. We've got the mysticisms, a belief in the existence of realities beyond perceptual and intellectual apprehension that are central to being and directly accessible by subjective experience. That's the definition. We've got Hermeticism that Masonry pulls from, a set of philosophical and religious beliefs or gnosis, hidden knowledge, secret knowledge, based primarily upon the Hellenistic Egyptian serigraphical writings attributed to Hermes, Thoth, and Hermes. Alchemy. It's interesting, if you look at the list of books that Freemasons are told to read, how many alchemy books you get there. Okay, a form of chemistry and speculative philosophy concerned principally with discovering methods for transmuting baser metals into gold and with finding a universal solvent and an elixir of life, immortality. Astrology, the study of the movements and relative positions of the celestial bodies interpreted as having an influence on human affairs, will also be evident. And then the Kabbalah. We must remember that during the captivity in Babylon of the Jews, they were exposed to a lot of Babylonian mysteries, and they developed the Kabbalah, which is a terribly occultic thing amongst the Jews that is really pulled into Masonry. The literal Kabbalah was made use of in the writing of what Mackey termed the advanced degrees of Freemasonry. These more properly should be termed the additional degrees of concordant Masonic bodies. Okay, so those, in short and very quickly, there's more detail in your notes, but would be the spiritual roots from which Masonry today pulls its symbolism, its power, and its influences. Okay, that's not good. Do you see anything biblical there? Anything good? Okay. It's the opposite, okay? It's nauseating if you have to read up some of those things. So let's quickly look at the historical roots of Freemasonry. Firstly, it can be traced back to the Knights Templars. And even when you read books Masons wrote about Freemasonry, they all claim that their roots are from the Knights Templars. Now, the Knights Templars began with a noble idea to have an order of soldier priests, if I can put it that way, to protect people going to the Holy Land, to protect them during the Crusades. And they were given a building right at the temple, Old Temple of Solomon. So they were first called the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon in 1118 as an order of warrior monks. And their first Grand Master was Hugues de Payen, a Frenchman. Okay, and basically they grew very rich in the years that they were in Israel. They were there for many years during the Crusades, and then obviously when the Muslims took over, they had to leave. They came back to Europe, and by that time they grew very rich and very corrupt. And the Templars established themselves as the most powerful institution in Christendom, next to the papacy. They had immense power because of their money. They were given a lot of land by many kings and many rulers, and so they were very rich. But they came back to Europe, and they were not popular, especially with the King of France, Philip IV, because they were so powerful and had so much money. If I understand the history correct, they borrowed a lot of money to this king, and he owed them a lot of money, so he decided he's going to get rid of them so he can get all their riches for himself. And that's where we get October the 13th of 1307. That's where the whole issue of Friday the 13th comes from. Philip IV had dawn raids where he started to raid all the Templars and arresting them, trying to get rid of them and trying to get his hands on their supposed gold that they discovered at the Temple of Solomon. Okay, but what the issue was there is that it was said that these Templars did a lot of pagan things, that they were not really, they were secret, they had secret rites and rituals, nobody knew about it. Firstly, a lot of historians say yes, but the things that they confessed was gotten under torture, so it's probably not true. But there are records in other countries where Templars were questioned about what they were doing, where they were not tortured, that correlated to some of the stuff that was said in France. But basically, Philip IV burnt them on the stake and killed them off, and the Vatican or the Pope also brought out an order saying they're not allowed to exist anymore. But one of the things that they were accused of was that the Templars were practicing black magic, pederasty, which is the raping of boys, homosexuality, murdering babies, blaspheming the name of Jesus, and giving each other obscene kisses. Okay, funny things. What's interesting is that most do concur that somewhere along the line it is said that they worshipped a thing that they called Baphomet, whether it was the head of a goat or head of a person. There was some other head, bearded head. They don't know whether it was the previous master of the order. This head was worshipped in rituals in secret. Okay, and again, I can't go through everything about Baphomet, but Baphomet, according to Masonic scholars, was the goat of Mendes and is really the goat god in Satanism that refers to Satan himself. It is a phallic god. It's a hermaphrodite god, whatever. It's not a nice thing. Okay, so they were said to be busy with things like this, and especially that in their rituals they denied Jesus Christ and even did things with the cross in order to mock it. Sorry, you guys, my English is leaving me. Okay. It's interesting that they say the early Templar tombs that were found in Israel, so that's long before they left Israel and long before Masonry even existed, they found what is today clear Masonic symbols on those tombs, and that the Masons use today, especially the compass and the square. So they are quite convinced that the Knights Templars is one of the historical roots of Masonry. The next group that had a major influence on the modern development of Freemasonry was the Rosicrucians. The rose on the cross. Okay, that's not Christian. They were very esoteric. Masonic historians admit a connection between the Rosicrucians, and nearly all agree that Freemasonry owes much to this occult society. And again, this is a society that, their place of gathering was called the House of the Holy Spirit or something. It's just terrible how they went about and used the so-called Christianity, but it was really totally pagan. Let me just see if there's a few things that I can talk about here. They had a lot of alchemy involved in their rituals and their philosophy. Also had a so-called person, Christian Rosenkreutz, who was the founder of the so-called mystery religion. He died, and then they discovered his tomb later, and then the whole thing was brought back to a more modern version with all the writings so-called writings that he left behind. The society was secret because it had the so-called power to heal. One of the disciples uncovered his tomb, and the discovery heralded a new era. The members of the secret fraternity were called Rosicrucians. They claimed that they never felt hunger. They had occult power, and they also had access to lost secrets of science and medicine. You see, the moment people have so-called secrets, hidden knowledge, you know you're working with darkness. Okay? In 1616, a book called The Chemical Marriage of Christian Rosicrucians appeared, an occultic allegory of a wedding in which some of the guests are killed and then brought back to life through alchemy. Okay, remember the whole thing of the paganism? A god figure that dies and then being raised up again. One of the key characters is a woman named Virgo Lucifera, the Virgin of Lucifer. The document is both an initiation and an allegory of alchemical transformation. Alchemy was the means to produce the philosopher's stone, which gave immortality. So their quest was immortality through these so-called secrets. Okay, but this was very occult, witchcraft, and this had a lot of influence over Freemasonry. Now, if we look at the stonemasons of the Middle Ages, where we get the terms of Freemasonry from originally, masonry, were people that were involved in what they called operative masonry, were actually builders of buildings and of temples. Stonemasons formed guilds and served as a form of trade unions, because in those years you couldn't carry a card to say you were part of a union. Okay. However, since many masons traveled from city to city to work on cathedrals, it is speculated that the tokens of masonry were used as ways of determining the level of proficiency of craftsmen. So they had secret signs, and if you knew the sign, it means you were proficient up to a certain level. So if this guy was traveling around and you wanted to get somebody to help building your cathedral in your town, the architect would be able to know what his level of craftsmanship is through the secret sign that he has. And those that were not proficient to that level didn't get the sign. Okay. They had some odd ideas, obviously, in their craftsmanship, and a lot of it was occult in nature. Although medieval Europe was Catholic, a large percentage of the common people were pagans, obviously. Okay. You can think about it even today. If I tell you, get yourself a builder to build something, what's the chance that he's Christian? Even if we're a Christian nation, if you understand what I'm saying. We're now talking about Europe that was Christianized, but Europe was pagan. And it doesn't mean everybody was happy to become a Christian. They liked their old pagan religion. Okay, so a large percentage of the common people were pagans in practice, if not in theory. And many of the feasts, saints, and even cathedral sites of the medieval church were actually pagan feasts, gods, and worship sites. And probably the majority of stonemasons were pagan. So what we find is that if you go to a lot of these cathedrals that were built by these masons, you get a lot of paganism in and on them. Okay? A good example is Notre Dame. Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was built on the site of an important temple to the horned god of witchcraft in the Celtic religion, also one of the mystery religions. Notre Dame is noteworthy for another reason, because high masons realized that much of the symbolism and ornamentation is actually a code which masons used to pass on alchemical mysteries to their successors. So they didn't write their stuff down, but they put it on the buildings to teach one another the secrets. And these secrets are actually the very essence of modern masonry. The secrets could never be written, partly because they were deemed sacred and were communicated only from mouth to ear, and because hardly anyone in the guilds could read. Much of what appears, especially on the central porch of Notre Dame, are actually memory aids, which the elder masters used to illustrate their secrets to the younger craftsmen. And there you see, for instance, a picture of a funny lady, but that picture is the symbol for alchemy, the Lady of Alchemy, on the Notre Dame, supposedly a Christian church. Okay? They were riddles etched in stone and intended to last for centuries. Most of these riddles cannot be deciphered today without the keys which were provided in Masonic initiation. To the adept, the face reveals the ultimate secrets of masonry and so-called royal secret contained in alchemical formula. Okay, for instance, if you look at the big rose window in Notre Dame, it's a Rosicrucian symbol. Even to this day, there's the expression sub rosa, meaning under the rose. Something communicated under the rose was totally secret and could never be revealed. Okay, so that was the first historical roots of modern day Freemasonry, which we call operative Masonry. But then they moved into what we call speculative Masonry, and they started to allow into their membership people that were not part of building processes or had any knowledge about building. But they were people who were willing to assist in building a spiritual temple on earth. A temple of universal harmony. Wooly. Masonry thus evidently began initiating non-stonemasons into their ranks. This formed the final catalyst which brought modern Masonry into being. The Freemasons were an organization of builders who were bound together by secret knowledge of the relationship between the earthly and divine sciences of architecture. In other words, the science of how an earthly structure was built would supposedly provide wisdom on how to build a spiritual temple. For whom? Okay? And then modern Freemasonry was started in 1717. Okay, most Masons trace their founding to the first Mother Lodge, which met in a tavern, the Goose and the Gridiron in London in 1717. On the 24th of June, the feast of St. John, a day held most sacred by the Knights Templar because it's the summer solstice, which is also a high satanic holiday. Okay, in 1726, this lodge became the Grand Lodge of all England. And this was followed by schisms between other Grand Lodges, both in England and the continent. And in 1773, the second most influential Grand Lodge, the Grand Orient, was formed in France. And there's quite a big difference between English Freemasonry and French Freemasonry, because French Freemasonry is extremely esoteric and occultic. And if you look at the influence of French Freemasonry in the world, it's always been with a lot of bloodshed. Okay. I just want to mention maybe that when the Knights Templars were persecuted in France, a lot of them fled to Scotland. And that's why we talk about the Scottish rites within Freemasonry, because it seems that in Scotland a lot of these people continued some of these practices that later became what we call modern day Freemasonry. So that's how Freemasonry started as we know it today. Sorry, I'm not keeping up. Another institution that we need to know about is the Illuminati, that was formed by Adam Weishaupt on 1 May 1776. And his purpose with the Illuminati was to create a secret society within the secret society that is Freemasonry. Okay, this secret society, called the Ancient and Illuminated Seers of Bavaria, it was founded on a mixture of Masonic secrets, Islamic mysticism, and Jesuit mental discipline, because he was raised by Jesuits, they say. Effectively creating a secret order within a secret order. Now, I don't have time to go through that, but what we need to understand is, if we talk about the Illuminati, it's something that really was sort of creating a higher class of secrets or special people within the secret society that is Masonry. And it seems to have been Weishaupt who gave wings to the geopolitical ambitions of the Masons in getting involved in power, in government, and trying to control things at that level. And it was the first time since the Templars that somebody tried to use it also for that purpose. And we see a lot of that today. So let's look at Freemasonry today. Masonry universally defines itself as a regular system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Masons, like any secret society, has layers within layers. You cannot understand it if you're not initiated. Freemasonry calls God the great architect of the universe. Okay? Nowhere in Scripture is God called the great architect of the universe. Okay? According to them, God is universal. For you to become a Freemason, you need to believe in a God, whether it's Allah or Ra or Baal or Buddha or Krishna or Jesus, that's all right. You're just not allowed to try and convince other people to come to Jesus, just as long as you believe in a God. And there's a big reason for that, because they're trying to introduce you to a certain spirit. If you don't believe in a divinity or some God aspect, then how can they introduce you to that spirit? Okay, you start off in Masonry with what we call the blue degrees. The blue degrees are but the outer court of the portico of the temple, Pike says. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. That's why most people that get involved in Freemasonry only stay in the first 3 degrees, and they don't really know what it's all about. It is not intended that they shall understand them, but it is intended that they shall imagine they understand them. So, what's he saying? Our purpose is to deceive people when they get involved in Freemasonry, and we will only stop deceiving them about our true purpose when they get right up there, and then it's too late anyway, because they're going to be part of it. Okay? We've got 3 degrees in the blue degrees, which forms the foundation of Freemasonry. But the first one called Entered Apprentice, the second one Fellow Craft, and the third degree Master Mason, or the degree of darkness visible. Doesn't sound good, does it? Okay, so what happens on the first degree? In the first degree, the Entered Apprentice, that's the tracing board that they use to explain a few hidden symbols for you, and it's all very woolly. Basically what they do spiritually is to get you to deny God, because when you enter Freemasonry, you are blindfolded and so forth, and they say this is so and so, he has no light, and he is asking for the light of Freemasonry that can be found in this lodge. So you're denying the true light to receive false light. Okay? You're basically being born into paganism. It's a replication of it's a false born-again experience. It's counterfeit of the true regeneration process. William Schnoebelen says it's basically when you are being born into this new goddess and God aspect. And this is the first time, then, the first degree, there's the first blood oath that you pronounce, that if you reveal the secrets of the society, then they can cut your throat from ear to ear, and the whole thing about that. Okay, so there's a blood oath, a death oath, that if you do not keep these secrets and if you share it with somebody else, then you would be in trouble. To go in, this is how you must look like. You can't see that, but the man is blindfolded. He's not allowed to have any metal on him, which William Schnoebelen says it's because it's witchcraft. When you do witchcraft stuff, you're not allowed to have metal on you. They put a rope around your neck. You must open your left breast or right breast, I can't remember which one, so they can see you are male and different things. Okay, it's really, I'm not going to go into those details. It's just what we need to understand what the principles are. The second degree then takes you further into the symbolism of Freemasonry, introducing you to things and making you feel comfortable with it. You are introduced to the so-called Temple of Solomon, and more symbols of Freemasonry are introduced, entering into more spiritual contracts, and you also have a second blood oath. I can't remember which one that is. Okay, the third degree, you move then into a false baptism. No, they're not giving it these terminologies. They are, but in a very allegorical way. This is basically the story where Hiram Abif dies and is killed and then resurrected from the dead. And then this person, the initiate that goes into it, goes through a whole fake resurrection process where they put him into a tomb, not a tomb, a coffin like that, and then you are raised up from it. It's a false baptism. You die with Hiram Abif. That is the Messiah in the Masonic allegory, and raised from the dead. And this is what they call the occult consciousness raising experience. When you're a witch or an occultist, you go through the same process to be raised into a new consciousness of these type of spiritual things that you are engaging. And then you also have the third blood oath. Okay. Those are the 3 signs for it. The throat that is cut. Okay. The cutting out of the chest of your heart, and the pulling out of the heart and lungs, and then the cutting open of your bowels. Those are the blood oaths that you make in those 3 levels. If you do not keep these secrets hidden, then they can do those things to you. Okay, when you go to further degrees, that you get two different paths that you can take. That's not the only way you can get up to the top of the Masonic structure, but these are the two main paths, what they call the York Rite. If a new Master Mason is perceived to be a Christian, often he will be directed to the York Rite, since that has the so-called Christian degrees. It's got more Christian pictures and stories so that you will fall for everything that they tell you. The second way you get up there is through the Scottish Rite. If the Mason is more secular or in a hurry, he is advised to go the route of the Scottish Rite. Okay, and those are the pictures you get of how you can get up to the top. The Scottish Rite, you've got 33 degrees, 32 degrees. With the York Rite, you've got less, but at the end of the day, you want to end up at least the 33rd degree if you want to go to the highest point in that. There's another way that they explain it and depict it, and you can see there's so much symbolism there, it's just impossible to explain everything, but that's the route they would go. Okay, I think we'll break here. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the York Rite, the so-called more Christian Rite. What's one of the interesting things is if you go into the Royal Arch degree, you get the so-called secret name of God. And if you've got this name, you can do wonderful things with it, like raise people from the dead, because that's where they do that's one of the rituals, I think, where that happens. But basically what they say is that the secret name of God in that level is Jabulon, which comes from three names. Jah, which refers to Yahweh; Bul, what's the name of Baal or Baal; and On, the name of the Egyptian sun god. Okay, so you see the nice mixture that they bring in. The pinnacle of the York Rite is what they call the commandery of the Knights Templar. This is done in Jesus' name and is nothing but a mockery of the Last Supper. It's again a false communion where they're doing, I can't go through the details, but you again have blood oaths, and they've got this funny table with cloth over and different symbols, 11 silver goblets, and you drink. Out of each goblet, you drink, what was that? A toast. You drink a toast to a individual, and the last goblet is then you drink a toast to somebody they don't tell you who it is. And they've got a skull on the table and whatever. It's really a bit sickening. But it's all about the spirit of death, and it's 5 libations that they bring. One for King Solomon, Hiram, king of Tyre, Hiram Abif. The 4th libation is in the memory of Simon of Cyrene, and the 5th is the most sinister of all. The candidate is never told whom the 5th libation is drunk to, and is offered to him out of a skull. He drinks out of a skull. He's told to repeat an oath that I've written down there for you, which is not a nice thing. Basically, this is a blasphemy on the Lord's Supper. An unholy parody almost as bad as the satanic mass. It is undoing the very covenant that Jesus began. This is not Christianity, but a careful devised fraud, and a fraud which one can join only after taking 12 Christ-denying oaths. You don't know you're denying him, but symbolically, and then what you are attaching yourself with in paganism, you are. Then the highest point that you want to get to in the Scottish Rite is what they call the shrine. There have been frequent historical links between the Muslim religion and the origins of Masonry. The most obvious connection with Islam in the world of the lodges is the shrine. The ancient Arabic order, Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, is the full name. Okay? And you do your oaths on the Quran. The shrine is openly evocative of Arab culture. The shrine is actually the sacred shrine of Islam, the Kaaba in Mecca. That's what that refers to, that word, the shrine. The shrine ceremony is steeped in demonic Islamic religion, utterly foreign to the God of the Bible. For example, the shrine initiate must swear the unusual, awful oath on the Quran, in addition to the Bible, ending thus, and may Allah, the God of Arab, Muslim, and Mohammedan, the God of our fathers, support me to the entire fulfillment of this same. Amen, 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 amen. Okay? And then we see that what does Freemasonry really come to? It is really the worship of Lucifer. That is their real purpose. That all the rituals are to get you to this very point, Luciferianism. And these are quotes that I've mostly put down of Albert Pike. Okay, the question asked of the initiate at the first, when he's coming into the lodge, is, what do you seek? And you say, I seek light. The second degree, what do you seek? I seek more light. Where do you seek it? And they say, I seek it from this lodge. In the second degree, and it's not without significance that the eminent Mason Albert Pike tells us that Lucifer is the source of that light. Pike teaches that Satan is not a person, but a force created for good, the instrument of liberty and free will. They represent this force which presided over physical generation, sex, under the mythological and horned form of the god Pan. Thence came the he-goat of the Sabbath, which is festival, brother of the ancient serpent and the light bearer or phosphor, of which the poets have made the false Lucifer of the legend. So he says, listen, what the Christians say about Lucifer is false. That's not true. He's really the one that brings us light. He also said the Masonic religion should be, by all of us, initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary for light to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the state. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. You see? It's only the enemy getting people to worship him into the total deception that he's the true light bringer and Adonai is the enemy. Okay, then Albert Pike also started the Palladium, which was the highest place you can get to in Freemasonry, was together with Giuseppe Mazzini. And they had the titles of Sovereign Pontiff of Lucifer. Okay, and the whole purpose of the Palladium was to really further their Luciferian doctrine. Palladium Lodge, the traditional Palladium imprecation says, glory and love for Lucifer. Hatred, hatred, hatred to the God accursed, accursed, accursed. That's what they say when you get into that high position. Okay. So basically, Freemasonry is like any other pagan religion, rooted in the pagan mystery religions, and it ends up in the worship of Lucifer. And Lucifer is symbolized by the sun god, is symbolized by all those light aspects that you get in that pagan religion. Why do you only have men in Freemasonry? Why is it a men's only fraternity? We know they started women's fraternities too, but it's really about the men, because it's ruled over by a goddess, just like in the pagan religions. I believe there's the Queen of Heaven, a goddess figure that rules over that. Okay, let's look at the symbolism used in Freemasonry. Firstly, the square and the compass, which is their best and well-known symbol. They say the G stands for geometry. And then later on they say the G stands for God. And then later on you learn it stands for the generative power, which is the sexual symbolism. Okay? In the first degree, the meaning of the square and compass is the square, to square our actions, the compass, to circumscribe and keep us within the bounds of all mankind, but more especially with a brother Mason. Woolley. But Albert Pike then says, the square and the compass are related to the point within the circle. He says it's exactly the same. The central symbol of Masonry actually represents the human reproductive organs. In what is called esoteric Freemasonry, we learn that the square is the symbol of the phallus, the God force in witchcraft, and the compass are the symbol. Compasses are the symbol of the female organs called the yoni or the shakti, the goddess force in occultism. So that is a male and a female organ joining. Written by their own writers, okay? Albert Mackey reveals the true meaning of the square and the compass are related to the point within the circle. The point within the circle is an important symbol of Freemasonry. It's originally a sun worship symbol, and it symbolizes the male member entering the female member. Okay? Sex rights. Symbol is somewhat obtruse, allusion to the old sun's worship, and it introduces us for the first time to what the ancients knew, the worship of the phallus. Okay, another symbol used a lot within Freemasonry is obviously the obelisk. Now take us back to the story of Osiris and Isis. When she got all his body members back together, she couldn't get his phallus because there were fish in the Nile that ate up his phallus. So she cursed those fish. And then she built him a wooden phallus. Got him back to life for a while with a wooden phallus, and then he impregnated her. And then obviously he had to die because she could only keep him alive and long enough to impregnate her with his new phallus that she made for him. And then she became pregnant with what they call Horus, the reincarnation of Osiris. Okay, and so this became the symbol to worship Osiris, the sun god, with. Okay, I can tell you, I studied landscape architecture. We were told the most beautiful element to terminate an axis with is a obelisk. In the 4 years that I studied landscape architecture, nobody told me what it meant, but we were told it's beautiful, and we were told to use it in our designs because if you have an axis, that's the best way you can do it. So there's a lot of people that use these symbols in total ignorance. A few years later, I spoke to one of the girls that studied with me, and she showed me one of the projects they did where she was, and they put up a lot of obelisks in their design. And I asked her, do you know what an obelisk means? When I told her, she was shocked. Okay? But so we must understand a lot of the symbolism is replicated also in ignorance. But whoever started it, and the Freemasons definitely know what they're using it for. The phallus was sculptured representation of the male organ, and the worship of it is said to have originated in Egypt. In the mysteries, we find the remote origin of the point within a circle, an ancient symbol which was first adopted by the old sun worshippers and incorporated into the symbolism of Freemasonry. Okay, the next thing that you will see often is the third eye, or the eye of Horus, or the all-seeing eye. Okay, that's a Freemason symbol. Comes from the eye of Horus, also Egyptology, because Horus, in a fight with Seth, lost one of his eyes. And so he only had one eye left. Okay? That's a symbol of illumination, of many other things, and the Freemasons love to use it. It's also, if you look at with the sunlight or the light coming from behind it, can represent the God that they worship, Lucifer himself. Okay, the twin pillars of the so-called Temple of Solomon. This is not the twin pillars of Solomon, because Solomon's temple did not have two orbs on them. Okay, they give it the same names as Solomon's temples, but you've got two orbs. The one is a terrestrial orb, and the other one is a celestial orb. And if you think again back to the pagan symbology, heaven and earth, the male and the female that comes together. Okay. And again, as we said, pillars have a significance because of Osiris, for instance. You get many other pillars, like the 5 different orders of pillars, the Tuscan, the Doric, the Ionic, the Corinthian, the composite, that they use to say certain things with. This is, for instance, where the number 5 would be the 5 senses, and within paganism, you've got the 5-pointed star that can represent many things, but one of the things it represents would be your 5 senses. In there, they've shown that each one of those pillars represent one of those 5. Within their some symbols, this is the first degree, you've got 3 pillars. Again, they've got all 3 different designs of a different order. Okay, I can't just explain everything. There's not a lot of time. They use the 6-pointed star, the hexagram, a lot. Please, this is not the Star of David. This is a pagan occultic symbol. Okay, because the triangle that shows up is a symbol of the male regenerative organ, or the male god, the active member. If you the triangle that shows down would be a symbol of the womb, would be a symbol of the female entity. And this is the coming together of those two forces. Okay? It's not pure, again, used a lot by the Masons. The pentagram, the pentacle, or what they call the star of Sirius. The number 5 is most used with occult incantations and imagery in witchcraft. And that's what you kneel on in a Freemason's lodge, because the altar is built on a star like that. Okay? The inverted pentagram, that's used extensively within Satanism itself. And if you look at the whole image of Baphomet, the image of Satan, it always fits into that upside down star. If we look at the dog star Sirius, which was the previous one, this many times refer to either Set or Isis, okay, in Egyptology. And I've given you some information there about the blazing star and how it's seen by the witches and by William Schnoebelen. Okay, then there's a checkered floor. You see a floor with white and black blocks. That's Masonry. And a lot of people would replicate it without knowing what it's about. But that really displays the dualism that they believe in. I just read in the Luciferian belief, the God of light and the God of darkness. Okay, it's a symbolism of good and evil, light and darkness, Christ and Belial, yin and yang. Same concept. The feminine would be the black, dark. The masculine would be the white, light, because that's now the sun god Osiris and so forth. So wherever you see that, that's Masonic symbolism. The Ouroboros, Ros, something like that. Okay, it's the snake that eats its own tail. Okay, again, that's also very occultic symbolism. That's referring to the cyclical stuff again. It's referring to the beginning. That's again the end. Sorry. The cycle of rebirth. If you think about the occultic stuff where there's adaptive deception, where you're just continuing the same thing, there's a lot of symbolism. It's so difficult to take a symbol and say it has just one meaning. Because within every pagan system, they add something else to it or just give another angle to it. And many times when you go to Europe, we'll find that snake on statues and pillars and stuff. Okay, that's Masonic. Handshakes, feet, signals. Okay, those are handshakes in some of the different degrees. Whenever two Masons meet one another, you will give the handshake to indicate on which degree you are. Even the way they use their feet. That's why with many paintings and photographs taken of leaders, you can get Masonic messages. What are they doing with their hands? What they are doing with their feet? Even when they go to court cases many times, because if a Mason judge sits in a court and it's a Mason brother that's before the court, through signals, that person can show to that judge, I'm a Mason, you have to rule for me. Because in all their oaths, at the end they promise that they're never allowed to act against another Mason brother. For instance, one of the things they say within a court case, if a guy that's a Mason see that he loses, his last resort will be to say aloud in the courtroom, isn't there justice for the son of a widow? Because Hiram Abif was the son of a widow. And by saying that, he's telling the judge, I'm a Mason, you need to help me. So they've got hidden signs and signals, and it's all hidden. For instance, that is a certain degree, very high up degree in Freemasonry. Why do they put their hands there for a photograph? We know, for instance, on the right side, Washington was a Freemason. We know Lafayette, on the left side in France, was a very high up Freemason. We don't know about Stalin, but he's giving us the signal of that specific degree. Karl Marx, Napoleon. Napoleon was a Freemason. He was initiated into the secrets in the pyramids in Egypt. And his wife told him, please bring me back an obelisk. Okay, the swan. You see the swan, the small swans drinking the blood from their mother. That's a Masonic sign. We've got, for instance, the Swanebroeders in Holland. So we see that many times. Skull and bones, the worship of death. Okay, they wear aprons of lambskin. That apron is a symbol of Luciferian priesthood. You're an occult priest if you wear that apron. It's covering the most holy place of the Mason, his genitals. Okay? Jacob's ladder, that's really just your progression into the secrets, into illumination, getting closer to the light. Sun, moon, and star symbols, you can get a lot of that. The keystone that you get many times in Masonic architecture. They say that is the stone that the builders rejected. In the whole story of Solomon, this keystone was lost. And because everybody thought, what a useless stone, it's shaped strangely. And then they say it's the stone that the builders rejected. That's not true. That's referring to Jesus, okay? Hiram, the widow's son, sent to King Solomon. And this is a symbol of completion, the summer solstice in some instances. It's interesting, that thing that you see written there, that's what it means. Hiram, the widow's son, sent to King Solomon, completion. But I promise you, they'll probably have 3 or 4 other meanings for that if you go higher up. Okay, and then anchor, for instance, is a symbol of hope. We see that many times, the Tau. Okay, so I just want to open up my next slide show. Okay, the next is I quickly want to look at some of the influences that Masonry bring. There's a lot of other things I could talk about, but firstly, what we need to recognize that if you've got a family member that's involved in Masonry, there's certain influences carried, and I want to say not just certain influences, just about every thinkable curse you can think of flows through Masonry into families. It all depends on how high up a person goes, how much he's opened up for things to flow into his family lines. But obviously, one will notice a formidable spiritual deadness in talking with Masons about the Lord. It's like pouring water over a rock. Where can this deadness come from? It's because of the Masonic things that he's opened up for. What it really does, it blinds him for the true light. If you try to speak to a Mason about Jesus, you'll see there's a total deadness. That person just cannot see. Freemason men bring a covering of darkness over their families and influences. Many times we talk about the curse on the oldest son, where the oldest always dies unnaturally. The Lewis curse and things like that. In families, there's an increase in sexual immorality and perversion because it's the pagan sex rites. What do you think it will cause? It will cause perversion. Homosexuality is a fruit of Freemasonry. One of the fruit of Freemasonry. Okay? There's an increase in child sacrifice because in the pagan religions there was you can go and read some books about it, but they found there's an increase in abortions in families with this background, increase in drug and substance abuse. For them to access certain mysteries, they have to make use of certain chemicals or stuff to get them into the right trance. If you go higher up, more people dabbling in the occult and Satanism. Poverty, dyslexia, different sicknesses. A lot of things are connected. Infertility, or many times connected to curses in Freemasonry. You can think every time you make an oath, for instance, if I reveal these secrets, you can cut my throat from ear to ear. Suddenly you see problems with the throat in that family line because that's the oath that was spoken. Okay? And so each one of the oaths gives a legal right to another body part and so forth. I'm not going to go into those details. I'm not a counselor. I'm not good with these things. I'm just saying that if there's Masonry within your family, there will be an immense list of things that might manifest. And not to be worried, there's ways to deal with it. There's renunciation prayers that are available from different ministries and places that you can go through. And if you need some of that, Elizabeth and them can put you in contact with where to get the right renunciation prayers to renounce Freemasonry within your family lines and to start cleansing that away. In nations, I believe Masonry brings especially, we must understand that it's a witchcraft spirit, just as I shared with you that in a black religion, ancestral religion would open up for witchcraft spirit. I believe the Masonic spirit brings an antichrist spirit into a community, and that's why I believe Europe has such an antichrist situation, where I really believe the spirit in France is a spirit of antichrist. Anything that resembles God is being opposed. Okay? Witchcraft spirit. Witchcraft is always part of manipulation, domination, control. So we've got a spirit of control, a spirit of death, very strongly. If you've got a church with a lot of Masonic stuff in it, you'll see there's death there. or even a religious spirit. Both of them are really working together, because a religious spirit brings death to any spiritual life. You can't see the Holy Spirit can't flow in that type of setting because of the spirit that reigns there. Perversion, you can just think. Deception and confusion. Darkness and spiritual blindness. All those things would be fruit connected to the spirit of Freemasonry, or Freemasonry functioning in a corporate setting, or especially in a nation. Now, the Freemasons do what the pagans do, in that they say they want to bring that which is in heaven and establish it on earth. Okay? That's very scriptural. You know the devil didn't create any principles. He just perverts them. God taught us, as it is in heaven, so it must be on earth, and we must pray that that can come into an earthly position so that heaven can manifest here. And so what they are doing is they are looking, for instance, a lot of the pagan religions, they look to the stars and they replicated that onto the earth. If we look at the pyramids of Egypt, they say it's aligned with certain stars. Okay? So if we look at city layout in ancient cities, we see also in ancient cities many times became an altar to a god. The way the city was laid out was to be an altar to a certain spiritual entity. So I really believe that the Masons are using their symbolism to really have that effect, but they're not bringing down heaven. They're bringing down the second heaven, the demonic stuff, into this position where we are on earth. So I just quickly want to explain that, because to me that's the principle that God wants to teach us. If you look at the tabernacle of Moses, God said to him, the pattern that I showed you in heaven, that's what the tabernacle is. You must replicate that pattern, okay? And that pattern is basically, if you look at the tabernacle, let me put it that way first. If you look at the tabernacle is exactly how the heavens are constructed. Okay, you've got the outer court symbolizing the earth and the natural realm. Earth and the first heaven, which would be your physical heaven. You've got the holy place symbolizing the second heaven. You've got the most holy place symbolizing God's throne, God's presence. So when you look at that structuring of earth, heaven, physical heaven, second heaven where we've got our demonic seated, and then the third heaven where we get God's throne and God's presence. What is happening when people are replicating things on earth is they are activating certain things. So if we are doing it in a godly manner, if we are ministering at God's altar, we're taking initiative, seeking God, ministering to Him, making contact with God, it opens up the spiritual portals of God's heavenly things and moves us at the end of the day into intimacy with Him, into relationship with Him. The same happens within the pagan religion. They start at an altar. They start worshiping or trying to seek a certain spiritual thing. That moves them into a dedication. That moves them into things being opened up to them. That's secret. And at the end of the day, they end up in relationship with those demons, where we've seen with sexual perversion and even having intercourse with spirits. Okay, so what's interesting, if you think of Freemasonry, in the outer court, the guy that's in the outer court doesn't have a clue what's going on in the Holy or the Holy of Holies. That's where the public, or I would say Masons in the beginning, start. But there are certain guys that are initiated that knows what's going on in the inner court positions. Okay, but that's not all. What happens when we do that is there's download then starting to take place from the spiritual position. Positively, if we serve God correctly, firstly, if we see right at the top, that's His place of His presence, His authority, God's presence becomes tangible and gets downloaded into that earthly position. Secondly, where we look at the altar of incense, that's a representation of prayer and worship. We see that God downloads new technology on how to worship Him. We see the table of showbread and we see the lampstand. The table of showbread talks about teaching. The lampstand talks about revelation. So if we are doing this thing spiritually correctly, we will see that there will be heavenly revelation, teaching and understanding downloaded to us. The basin talks about dedication, being consecrated. Okay, so it's not just us doing something to open up into the spiritual realm. The moment we open up those things, there's a download from those spiritual positions to us. And that's what happens in the demonic. When they open that dynamic in the spiritual realm towards demons, what flows down? Spiritual insights on how to worship demons. Spiritual insights and teachings. Spiritual philosophies that come from demons that start filling that community. Consecrations where you consecrate yourself to demons. So that's the problem. That's why these things work when pagans, when Freemasons, when anybody from a demonic perspective puts these things down, these type of worship practices, and then using their symbolisms and connecting that here, is because they're trying to get that down low. That's what the enemy is doing, and they're successful. There's a reason why when you go into a city like that, in communities like that, that there's no truth. Everything is deception. There's a system of understanding, but it's not truth. Because there's a demonic open portal where the enemy can download his perverted technology in order to bring darkness and keep people away from God. And that's why we can't look at these things and just say, well, so what? Because it is the enemy's way of bringing whole nations under a veil of darkness. Okay, that's how I understand it. And so when we, for instance, went and prayed at Unisa, God told us that Unisa would be the table of showbread and the candelabra symbol. That's the type of institution where teachings and so-called revelations of humanism and ancestral worship and so on is then brought forth into society. But for that to happen in a place like the university, somebody is ministering to the spiritual altar that opens up those dynamics so that those type of things come down from the demonic level. So we prayed about those things. So there's a lot of examples we can look at Paris, Brussels, London, the Vatican, La Plata, Washington, Canberra. There's some of them that I will be looking at very quickly. We have to understand that the whole of Europe has a very deep Masonic history. As you can see here, Gerda showed that to us already, how the Tower of Babel is utilized within the symbolism for Europe. I mean, that's defiled, and yet they use it because they believe in it. Look at the stars there, the inverted pentacle. Okay, how many stars? 3, 6, 9, 11. 11 stars. 11 is a number used in witchcraft a lot. You see Europa on the bull, again the goddess and the sun god figure. This is then the parliament in Strasbourg, and they state very clearly it was built to look like the unfinished Tower of Babel from this painting. And what's funny, if you stand there, we haven't been in that parliament. We were in Brussels parliament, the EU parliament in Brussels. But one thing I find interesting is when you stand at the main gate of this tower and you look through, in the middle there's a sort of a court area, a round court area because it's a tower, and it goes a bit down into the middle, and then there's a big round ball in the middle of that square. It reminds me of the womb with the egg cell in the middle of it. It looks like a womb. I believe that's what it is, but they don't explain it. If we look at the history of France, France had a very strong Masonic influence over the whole of the nation. It's really a difficult nation. The whole revolution was brought forth by the French Freemasons. And unfortunately also the Protestants in France, a lot of them became Masons because they had a common enemy. The Masons and the Huguenots or the Protestants had a common enemy, the state and the Roman Catholic system that empowered them. And so it's unfortunate, but one of the founders of the modern Freemasonry movement was the son of a Huguenot pastor that was taken out of France in a barrel, was put on a ship on a barrel to hide, to get him out as a little boy because the Huguenots were persecuted. And he was one of the co-founders of the Masonic order in 1717. Okay, so that's an unfortunate part of the history of France. And you can see this is the Declaration of Human Rights that came through the French Revolution. Do you see the symbols up top there? All Masonic. Okay. This is the again, this picture of the supreme being, the eye with the light around it. Who's the supreme being in Masonry? Lucifer. Okay, and they say the supreme being, a sovereign people, and a French republic. And on the one side you've got Voltaire, on the other side you've got Rousseau, and they both were philosophers, and most of those philosophers were the foundational basis for what Masons became. Now, if you look at the city of Paris, this is a very old drawing of Paris. It's a reconstruction of the map of Paris, and they believe the name Paris comes from the term par ici, because there was a temple to Isis not far from what Central Paris is today. And so the town was called Par, close to the temple of Isis. And then if you look at the symbolism of Paris, here we see the ancient goddess, the queen of the Egyptians, Isis, etched on a 15th century coat of arms for Paris. Okay? Note the boat and the dog on the flag, because the dog star symbolizes Isis. Okay? She went up just before the sun came up in Egyptian mythology as the summer season started. Okay? So that's interesting to see that the emblems for Paris from the beginning had her in. There's another coat of arms. Again, you see the boat. Paris is symbolized by this boat. Whose boat is it? It's Isis's boat. We haven't spoken about the fleur-de-lis, but that's also a Masonic symbol, or used in the Masonry. Here you see the goddess Isis on the facade of the Louvre, looking east at the rising sun in the Cour Napoleon. Why is she looking east? Either her husband or Horus, but it's a symbol of her. Okay, and there's many symbols. That's the coat of arms for Paris in 1811 that Napoleon designed. And again, you see the boat. You can't see it clearly, but on the front of this boat, there's a statue of a little doll, and that is Isis. And then you see a star up in the air, and that is the star of Isis. So Paris has always been connected to this Isis thing. Napoleon himself was a Freemason, okay? And so they strengthened this symbolism because it's part of the system that Masonry is trying to establish. This is a design that was done for Paris, the city of light. I always ask, what light? This is a pyramid project proposed by the revolutionary architect Etienne Louis Boulet in 1785, a cenotaph in the genre of the Egyptians, but it was never built. Then there was another project that they wanted to, in the centenary celebrations of the French Revolution, they wanted to put up a pyramid in the Baroque style in the Louvre. It was never done, but 100 years later, on exactly the same spot, a pyramid was erected. The glass pyramid designed by Ming Pei, constructed for the bicentennial celebration of the French Revolution in 1889. The link between the French Revolution and the pyramid is, of course, the symbol of the supreme being. It is a Masonic symbol. That wasn't just, oh, you've got a nice design, you're the winner. For hundreds of years, the Masons, since the Revolution, wanted to put up a pyramid there. Their symbol. Okay? We see that during the Revolution, they put up, for instance, this statue of Isis at Bastille. It was called the Fountain of Regeneration. Isis of the Bastille. This was a statue of the Egyptian goddess Isis with water sprouting from her nipples, and the president of the Convention Nationale filling his cup with a regenerative liquid symbolizing the new order, social and religious, for the French Republic. That's where the French Republic started. They got a prostitute, put her up in Notre Dame, and called her the goddess of reason, and worshipped her. Total paganism, but it's Freemasonry, because the whole revolution was because of Freemasonry. Okay, there you see, I studied landscape architecture. And if I designed a thing like that in front of a classical building like that in my studies, I would have not gotten marks. Because I'm not acknowledging the architecture. And yet, that's what they did. Now, Paris has an interesting axis, and I can't have a lot of time to explain that. Firstly, you see the island there, which is the Ile-de-France, where you've got Notre Dame. There's other archaeologists that say there was also a temple for Isis there, and this symbolizes her boat, okay, in the river. But basically there are two axes that go through the Louvre. This is an aerial view of the Louvre looking east. Note the historical axis passing through the equestrian statue of Louis XIV. Now, there's two different angles to these axes. Okay? And what's interesting is that these angles are exactly the same way it is at the temple of Luxor in Egypt, which was built to honor the sun and Isis. Okay, so the one line is the east-west line for the sun, and the other line is the exact line for the star of Sirius, Isis, as it would come up on that specific date in Egypt before the sun came up. So these guys that wrote this book said, they're not Christians, they are secular researchers, but what they say is, it is the similarities is exact. How that Egyptian model of Luxor, with the two exact lines and the exact degrees that those lines differ, were built into the straight lines in Paris. Okay? And it does not reflect where that star would come up in France. It reflects how it will come up in Egypt. Okay? There you see, if you go on with that straight line, you go to the Arc de Triomphe. Napoleon put it up, Freemason. Okay? And this axis was started by Louis XIV. Who was he? The Sun King. Louis XIV saw himself as Apollos. Okay, so the sun symbols were very important. There you can see the sun going down exactly on that axis on a certain date. Okay, then they've also built in 1989, Mitterrand was the president of France, a very high Freemason, and he under his presidency they built the pyramid, and they then built a new big arch in the area that's the commercial sort of economical hub there. La Défense is the area's name, and that's another arch, and that arch was specifically turned so that on the summer solstice the sun would set right through it. Okay, so those things don't just happen by accident. The people that planned it knows what they're doing. And why are they doing it? Obviously they're inspired by darkness, but the enemy also has a master plan that he's trying to put in place in order for him to bring forth darkness. Okay? And Paris is a very difficult city. It's a very difficult city to bring the gospel. And I think these things, that's exactly in Egypt, I don't know whether this is Luxor or Karnak, I'm not sure which, where the whole development was designed in such a way that on the summer solstice the sun sets on the axis. That was emulated because that's what they believe in the mystery religions. This is the axis that's the whole line from the Louvre right down to Défense. If you go in, I'm just showing you the line there. You go closer. Now you've got the main obelisk of Place de la Concorde right